This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Sai. Welcome everyone to the Kollel Agar de Pirka here in New York. I was in London last week, so they wanted to know what's Agar de Pirka. You know, said Agar de Pirka, you have to come see for yourself. Okay, so we have a very interesting subject this morning, Parshas Chayei. On the sheet, it looks like it's shorter than usual. It's not. Don't be fooled by the number of marmakoimos. There are really more marmakoimos, more than meets the eye. Let's talk about the primary subject of this week's Parsha, the Shidduch, the marriage of Yitzchak to Rivka, through the medium of Eliezer. Eliezer was the go-between, the Shadchan, the first Shadchan, between Yitzchak and Rivka. And if you look carefully at the Psukim and at the Gemara, we'll notice that Eliezer was much more than a Shadchan. Not only was he more than a Shadchan, but he seems to have married her to Yitzchak even before Yitzchak met her. In other words, Eliezer seems to be more than just the go-between, but he's actually the Mesader Kedushin, more than the Mesader Kedushin. He's making the Kedushin. He is, it would seem to be, the Shliach of Yitzchak to marry Rivka to Yitzchak. Where do we know this from? It's a Tosfos in Masechta Ksubos, Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Says Tosfos on Zayin Amud Beis and Ksubos. The Gemara wants to know, how do you know you need 10 people for Shavuot Brachos? The Gemara learns it from the pasuk in Rus. Vayikach Boyaz Asara Anoshim. Boyaz took 10 people. Frek Tosfos. Why is the Gemara learning it from Boyaz? Why do we have to go to Ksuvim? Why don't we have a pasuk in the Chumash? It says Eliezer took Asara Gemalim, 10 camels. Presumably on the camels were 10 individuals. You know, they weren't drone camels, they were real camels. So if they were real, that means they had people on them. They had people on them, l'chayra, that means that you had a minion. What? We'll get to that. It says Tosfos, uve Masechta Kala, in Masechta Kala, they bring a different pasuk. Vayevarchu es Rivka, that they gave a bracha to Rivka, and l'chayra that's Berchas Nesuin, and l'chayra there were 10 people there. So why does our Gemara and Ksubos learn it out from Rus? It says Tosfos, you can remember the Hasam Berchas Eresin. When the pasuk says Vayevarchu es Rivka, that refers to Berchas Eresin. V'hacha Berchas Nesuin. Here they made Berchas Nesuin. Says Tosfos, V'yesh lilmod misham, from Masechta Kala you could learn, Sheyesh levarech Berchas Eresin liisha hamiskadeshes aydei shliach. That even when a woman gets married through a shliach, you still make Berchas Eresin. Because Eliezer was marrying Rivka to Yitzchak as a shliach. He wasn't just asking her, by the way, I have a great guy for you in Lakewood, you're interested in him, you'll go check him out when you get back. No, he was literally marrying her off to Yitzchak. So there's a raya that when a woman gets married, Ayidei Shlichos, you still make Berchas Eresin. But says Tosfos, V'nira da'asmachta ba'almahi. It's not an outright proof. It's only an illusion. Why? Da'asara le'mishtama mehasam. We don't clearly see there were 10 people. 10 camels we see clearly. 10 bnei adam we don't see clearly. V'loi ayri pashti dekro Berchas Eresin. And b'chlal, the simple interpretation of the pasuk in this week's Parsha is not talking about Berchas Eresin. Marv Rabbi Sai, one thing we see from here. We see from here that Eliezer was not just going to Rivka and proposing an idea, but it seems to be that there was an actual marriage that was taking place. That being the case, Rabbi Sai, there's a major problem over here. You know what the problem is? The Gemara says, Masechta Kedushin, Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Asur la'adam she'yikadesh es ha'isha ad she'yorena. It's forbidden for a person to marry a woman unless he sees her first. Why? Shema Yiraba Ervas Davar. Maybe, how are we doing? Turan? We're good? Okay, so again, just to summarize, Tosfos and Ksubos says that Eliezer was the shliach of Yitzchak to marry him off to Rivka. Tosfos even says that perhaps this would be a proof that when a person gets married, al yedei shliach, you make Berchas Eresin. So here's question number one. We're going to have a whole slew of questions, and then we're going to sort of revolutionize our understanding of what transpired in this episode. Question number one. The Gemara says in Kedushin, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, that it is forbidden for a person to marry a woman until he sees her. What's the reason? Maybe Shema Yiraba Davar Maguna. He's going to see something unseemly. He's going to see something he doesn't like. V'yizgane alav, and she will be. It's fine. It's on. V'yizgane alav. She'll be disparaged to him. She'll be disgusting to him. V'rachmana Amar, and the Torah says, V'yahavta l'reacha kamaycha. You need to love your friend like yourself. Meaning, there's an Isser in the Torah, Leisisna sachicha bilvavecha. Don't hate another Jew, and your wife is another Jew. So you need to love your wife as you do every other Jew. That being the case, it is forbidden for a person to marry somebody unless he sees her first. So the question is, how was Yitzchak allowed to get married through Eliezer? After all, it is forbidden for a person to marry someone unless he sees her. Now, let's just flesh out this question. The Gemara in Bava Basra says on Daf Tezayin, the Gemara compares the greatness of Avraham Avinu to Eiv. And the Gemara basically says that Avraham Avinu was on a much higher level than Eiv. Despite the fact that Eiv says, Bris Krusa Le'enai Uma Esboinein Al Basula, Gemara in Bava Basra Daf Tezayin says that Eiv makes a covenant with his eyes that he would not look at another woman. The Gemara basically says, no, Afra Lepume de Eiv. Dust should go into the mouth of Eiv. Why? Because Eiv would not look at another woman, but his own wife he did gaze at. And Avram Avinu would not even gaze at his own wife. From where do we know this? From the pasuk that says, Hine na yadati ki isha yifas mareh at. Now I know you're a beautiful woman. That implies that until then, Avraham Avinu had never seen Sarah. Comes the Marsha, and the Marsha asks, what do you mean Avraham Avinu never looked at Sarah? We know that the Gemara tells us Avraham Avinu was Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, even Erev Tavshilan, even Isurei D'Rabbanan. And we know the Gemara says in Kedushin Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, also la'adam l'kadesh isha at sheireno, you're not to marry a woman until you see her. So how could Avraham say, oh, now I realize that you're a beautiful woman? That implies until then he had never seen her. Well, if he never saw her, how was he allowed to marry her? It is forbidden to marry a woman until you see her. It's good kasha. So the Marsha says, Avada, Avraham Avinu saw Sarah before they got married. However, once they got married, he did not have a need to see her again. That being the case, says Marsha, Avraham Avinu never saw Sarah from the moment they got married. Until that fateful day, when Sarah Imenu was over 60 years old, says the Marsha, and in Avraham Avinu's mind, he thought that there's no way she still looks the same as she did, at the Vart or at the Tanam. She must have aged. And then he sees her after, 40, 50, 60 years, and he couldn't believe it that she looks exactly the same as 60 years earlier. So Avraham Avinu says, now I know how beautiful you are, that means your beauty was preserved. Meaning, the Marsha is answering the kasha. The kasha is, how could Avraham Avinu marry her without seeing her? And the answer is, he never would have married her without seeing her. He certainly saw her originally. He had not seen her until this day, and now he sees her again, and he's blown away by the fact that she hasn't changed. Or, says the Marsha, the famous shita of the Marsha is, in general, there are many kashas, if Avraham Avinu was Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, how is he allowed to marry Hagar? She was a mitzvah, how are you allowed to marry an Egyptian? Another kasha, if Avraham Avinu was Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, so why didn't he do bris milah? The shita of the Marsha is only a Yid has to be Mekayim the Torah. And that means Avraham Avinu was not Mekayim the Torah until he had a bris milah. So he married Sarah before his bris milah. So don't ask a kasha, how was Avraham Avinu allowed to marry someone without seeing her? You're not allowed to get married without seeing a woman. The answer is that's when you keep the Torah. But Avraham Avinu never committed to keep the Torah before his bris milah. So in fact, says the Marsha, Avraham Avinu violated this din of not seeing your wife before marrying her. He never saw her. How was he allowed to do this? Before Bris Milah, Avram Avinu was not Mekayim the Torah. So there's a sefer I have at home called... What? Oh, and he married Hagar before the bris. Keturah, this would only fit in if Keturah was not Hagar and she was not a mitzvah. And she was not in other words, if Hagar and Keturah were two different women, then Keturah was not a mitzvah. Hagar was a mitzvah, but Keturah was not. But it would not fit in if they were the same person, right? Okay. Be it as it may, this question only has an answer for Avraham Avinu. But for Yitzchak Avinu certainly already had a bris milah. So if you're going to assume that Yitzchak Avinu was Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, how was he allowed to marry Rivka before he saw her? I asur la'adam she'ikadesh asa'isha ad she'yirena. This is the question, and the questions today come from a sefer, Darkei Shalom, from Rav Shalom Schachter, who's Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And he has a sefer on Chumash. I only have 2 volumes of it, on Bereshis and Shemais. And this is his kasha. Hateinach le'Avraham Avinu. Either he once upon a time saw her, or he never saw her, and it was before his bris milah. But what are you going to say for Yitzchak Avinu? So maybe you could say, I don't know, he must have saw her. He must have seen her. He made a pilot trip. He checked her out, and he did see her. But l'chara, that can't be. Why? So he didn't leave Eretz Yisrael. So she made a pilot trip, and when she made the pilot trip, he saw her. But the problem is, if you look later in Pasuk Samachei, the Pasuk says, "Vatoymer Rivka Elo Eved Mi Harish Halzeh." Who is this guy? So what do you mean? Who is this guy? I thought she made a pilot trip. So what are you going to say? She made a pilot trip. He saw her, but she didn't see him. So what kind of pilot trip is that? You know. Pretty doichik to say that she was there, he saw her, she didn't see him.
It doesn't say the bride has to see the groom, it says the groom has to
Correct.
see the bride.
But that means she never saw him.
Right.
So then, so what are you going to say? She didn't see him, but he saw her? That's a little strange.
To see him, but she never saw him?
No. She made a pilot trip so he could see her, but not that she could see him.
It's at a wedding. Somebody pointed around.
So then you'll see, you know what? But one second. It seems to be that Yitzchak did make a trip to Padan Aram from the fact that Eliezer says to Abraham, you know what? Do me a favor. If you don't get a wife for Yitzchak, Rakes b'ni loy tashev shama. Do not return my son there. That implies he was once there before, and Abraham Avinu is saying, don't return my son there. So Tosfos says, no, that's not how you read the pasuk. Says Tosfos, look at number 5. Even though Yitzchak Avinu never went to Padan Aram, you could say it's correct to say about Yitzchak, don't return there, because Eliezer was returning, so you're allowed to say return if even only one of the 2 people are returning. What's the proof? The proof is by Rus HaMoyaviyah. It says, Rus Hashava im Naami. She returned with Naami. What do you mean she returned with Naami? Rus had never been in Eretz Yisrael before. But since Naami was returning, it's considered like Rus is also returning. So we have no evidence that that Yitzchak ever went there. L'chara Yitzchak never went there. He's an Oila Tamima, and he never saw her. If he never saw her, how is he allowed to marry her? Okay, I hear. Yeah, I hear. That's a reasonable pshat. L'maisa, that's what Tosfos says. Tosfos says that it's going on Eliezer. Yeah, I hear. So that's question number 1. Question number 1 is, the Gemara says in Kedushin, Asur Laila Adam, She'ikadesh Asa'isha Ad She'yirena. So how could Yitzchak marry Rivka? This question you could answer. Why could you answer? How do you answer this question? There's a tour. The Torah in Even Ezer, Siman Lamed Hey says, look at number 6. Ha'ish yachal laso shliach lekadesh la'isha. A man could make a shliach to marry a woman for him. Vein isha stam, whether it's any woman, meaning I could say to you, marry me any woman you want. Vein isha ploinis, marry Shprinza, whoever she is. V'yomer la hashliach, and the shliach says as follows. Harei ad mikudeshes leploini. Do you imagine you go to a wedding in Williamsburg? You say, who's the chassan? Not sure. So who's there standing under the chuppah? It's a shliach. You ever see that? Not yet, right? But says the Torah, Hareya Mekudeshes L'Plini. Never say never. Aval, Im Efshar Lo Lekadsha Ba'atzma. If it's possible to marry her yourself, Asur Lekadsha Yidei Shliach. You're not allowed to use a shliach. Why not? Elam Kain Makira. Unless you know what she looks like. Because Shema Acher Kain, Yimtza Davar Maguna. Maybe afterwards you'll find something disgusting. V'tiskane olav. And she'll be demeaning to you. So listen carefully to the Torah. The Torah is saying you're not really allowed to marry through a shliach if you never saw her before. However, look carefully at the lashon of the Torah. Im efshar, to be mekadesh yourself, you're now to be mekadesh ayidei shliach. That is mashma. What if it's efshar to marry her yourself? Then you're allowed to marry through a shliach, even though you never saw her. Says the Beis Yosef, the Torah was very medaktik when he wrote im efshar. Why? Because if it's efshar, that if it's a makom rachaik, or you can't make it to her to see her, or she's a tsunua, you're never going to get a look, then you don't have to stop the kedusha, and then it would be mutter to get married through a shliach, even though you never saw her. So it could be that the reason that Yitzchak was allowed to marry Rivka, even though he never saw her before, it was efshar. He was an oila tamima, he wasn't allowed to go over there, so it was efshar, so there was no alternative. That's if it's efshar. But if it's efshar, it's not ma'akev. In other words, it's only l'charchila, but b'diavad it would be okay.
Can you arrange a shaliach to see a woman?
No, tam v'reach in l'svakeh. You can't. By the way, one of the biggest problems with shidduchim today is boys are stupid enough to talk to their friends, and their friends say, "No, this is not for you." No, it's not. It's not for the guy talking, but how do you know it's not for your friend? Everybody has different tastes. It should not be something that's discussed between people, you know?
Nowadays, would an iPhone work with the shaliach?
You mean, could you just Eitzah Tova, I would not recommend getting the first glance on these dumb phones, because the way people look on the phone, they look like they're from outer space, you know? Look,
The first thing people do.
let's move on. That's question number one. Question number one, Rabbi say, how is Yitzchak allowed to get married without seeing her first? So we've offered one answer. It was efshar. Question number two. When you make somebody a shliach to marry a woman for you, you're allowed to say, you know, the woman over there, Shprinza Basienta, I'm interested in marrying her. Please be Mekadesh Shprinza Basienta to me. But if you're going to tell him, go marry Stama woman for me, L'charchila, you're not supposed to do that. Why not? Says the Beis Shmuel. The Beis Shmuel is one of the classic Noisei Kalim on Even Ezer of Shmuel ben Uri Shraga Feivish. He's a Talmud of the Rebbe of Heschel of Krakow. And after the Rebbe of Heschel, the Rav in Krakow was Rav Aryeh Leib Fischel. He was called Der Heucher Leib. You know, he was very tall. And he married, the Beis Shmuel married this Rav Fischel's daughter. Anyway, the Beis Shmuel writes like this: L'chadchila ein lasoi shliach l'kadesh stam. L'chadchila, a person should not make a shliach to marry stam, a woman, without specifying which woman it is. Why not? What's the problem with making somebody a shliach to marry a woman stam? Very big problems could arise. L'mashal, if you tell somebody, marry me a woman stam, if that shliach dies, and you don't know who you're married to, then you're now to marry anyone in the world. Why? Because maybe it's going to be the sister. It's a male aguna, right? Because Shema Yisa, you might end up marrying the sister of your wife because you have no idea who you're married to.
Eliezer got the same instructions.
So we want to know what kind of shlichus was given. Avram Avinu didn't say any specific woman. So the halacha is you're now to make a shliach stam because maybe the shliach will die, and if the shliach dies, you're not going to be able to marry anyone in the world. Marva Rabbi say, there's a beautiful pshat in the Haggadah. You know, in the Haggadah we say, Tsei ulamad. Ma'bikesh Lavan Ho'arami Lasos Yaakov Avinu. Go out and see what Lavan Ho'arami wanted to do to Yaakov. Paroi lo gazar ela al hazacharim. The Lavan bikesh lakar es hakal. Lavan wanted to uproot everything, meaning Lavan wanted to destroy the entirety of Klal Yisrael. And the big question is, Lavan didn't want to destroy the entirety of Klal Yisrael. He just wanted to destroy Yaakov Avinu. Well, in what way did Lavan want to destroy everybody? So one of the Mefarshim say, we have it on the sheet here, number 10, Rabbi Warman, Zecharna Levracha, who lived here in the neighborhood, he wrote a sefer on the Haggadah called Oreis HaPesach. He quotes Rav Mordechai Gimpel Yafe, who says like this: if you make a shliach to marry a woman for you stam, then, and he dies, chazaka shliach oisa shlichusa, you have to assume he did the shlichus, and then the person is aser b'chol nashim sheba'olam. Why? Because shema yisa achois ishtoi. That's what Lavan wanted to do. Because we know in this week's Parsha, when Eliezer sits down to discuss the shidduch with Lavan and Besuel, so all of a sudden we see Besuel, and then all of a sudden Besuel's dead. What happened to Besuel? So Chazal say that Lavan tried to poison Eliezer's food. What's the remez? One remez says Vayisam. Vayisam is a lashon of Vayihisam. There was poison there. Also another thing. Some say, I once heard a very interesting pshat. The Gra once went to someone's house, and the Gra, the Talmidim noticed, the Gra was like eating until the point that he had to expel the food. So they asked the Gra, are you so hungry? Why are you eating so much? He says, because Chazal say, Kol ma she'amar balabayis asay, chutz mitzay. Whatever the balabayis says, do, unless he tells you to leave. The Balabaster kept on telling me, eat. So if it's a din in halacha, I have to be mekayim the halacha ad shetetzei nafshay, unless it's biklach nefashais. Memela, I have a kasha. Why did Eliezer say they offered him food? He says, I'm not going to eat until I talk. What do you mean? It's halacha. If the Balabayas offers you food, you have to eat. Must be it was pikuach nefashos to eat. It must be he realized it was poison. That's how Chazal know that Lavan was trying to poison Eliezer. Otherwise, why didn't Eliezer eat? Be it as it may, what would have happened if Lavan... What?
That's exciting.
Keep this halacha? Okay, maybe we'll come to that also. We'll come to that also. Be'ezus Hashem.
Besuel, not right.
Because what?
It was Besuel that was trying to kill him.
No, Lavan was trying to kill. Lavan tried to kill. The Malach came and switched it, and Besuel died.
And gave Besuel the food.
Mar Rabbi say, what would have happened if Lavan was successful in poisoning Eliezer?
Big problem.
Then who would never have been able to get married? Yitzchak. Then what would never have been? Klal Yisrael. That's Pshat in the Haggadah. Lavan bikesh lakar sakol. Lavan wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael. When did Lavan want to destroy Klal Yisrael? When he tried to poison Eliezer, then there would never be any continuity in Klal Yisrael.
Did Avram say to go back to my family?
What?
Did Avram say to go back to my family?
Okay, but still, we don't know who. We don't know who.
If he married somebody else that wasn't from his family.
And Avram said that if you don't find somebody, then you're free. You're free. But more Rabbi say, bottom line is, you're not allowed to make a shliach l'kadesh stam. So how was Eliezer given free rein just to go out and marry a woman to Eliezer? L'chadchila, it's usher to make such a shliach. So how is he allowed to do this? That's question number 2. Number 1, Yitzchak never saw her. Number 2, how was the shlichus valid? You're not allowed to make a shliach l'kadesh stam. Number 3, who was the shliach? Eliezer? Do you see anywhere in Kol HaTorah Kula that Yitzchak turns to Eliezer and says, I would like you to be my shliach, to marry a woman? There is no conversation that takes place in the Chumash between Yitzchak and Eliezer. In fact, Yitzchak's not even mentioned there. Abraham is having a personal conversation with Eliezer. He says, I want you to marry Yitzchak to me. You could marry your daughter to somebody. A father has no right to marry off his son. There's no authority of a father to marry off his son. How could Avram Avinu turn to Eliezer and say, Eliezer, go find a shidduch for Yitzchak? It's not up to Avram Avinu, it's up to Yitzchak. What's going on over here? What kind of shlichus is this?
37-year-old baby.
Yeah, he's 37 years old. I mean,
Maybe he made Avram a shliach.
So maybe you have to say that Yitzchak must have made Abraham a shliach to, Tata, I'm sitting and learning, find me a good wife. But here's the problem. The problem is that if Yitzchak told Abraham to be a shliach, to marry a woman for him, there are two kashas. Number one, the Gemara says in Kedushin Mem Hey Amud Beis, Chazaka loichatzif inish l'shavuye avua shliach l'kadosh lo'isha. There's a chazaka that nobody would have the chutzpah to tell their father, do me a favor, I'm going to sit at home, you find a wife for me that you like. There's a chazaka, no sane human being would do that. It's a chutzpah, it's brazen. What? I don't know, whatever happens, I could just tell you what the Gemara says is normal. I can only tell you what's normal. And what the Gemara says is normal is that a chazaka, a person would not have the chutzpah to tell their father, go find a wife for me. Also, Rabbi say, another kasha. And the other kasha is, there's a halacha in the Ramah, that if Yitzchak told Abraham, be a shliach for me to find a woman, would Abraham then be authorized to appoint someone else to sort of relinquish his responsibility and neglect his responsibility and give over the shlichus to Eliezer? There's another din. That what? Mili loy mimsaron l'shliach. Right? Kedushin milihu, umili ein mimsaron l'shliach. If you were appointed to be a shliach for somebody to marry a woman, you can't give over your role to somebody else. So what's going on over here? It seems like Eliezer is the shliach of Abraham, but Abraham has no authority to marry somebody to Yitzchak, unless Yitzchak appointed Abraham, which we said is shver, because the Gemara says in Kedushin, Lo chatzef inish l'shavuya avuya shliach l'kadosh lo'isha, and even more than that, Kedushin is mili, and mili lo mimsaran l'shliach. By the way, unless you say as follows, the Darkei Shalom of Shalom Shachter says, if you look in the Ktsois HaChoshen, in Siman Reish Mem Daled Sif Katan Beis, that a Mishaleach could go to a Shliach and say, I give you permission to appoint someone else. Meaning you can't tell somebody, you be my Shliach, and then that person give over on their own, but I could give you the authority to appoint a Shliach for me. So I guess you would have to say, and even though it doesn't say it in the Chumash, that Yitzchak went to Abraham and said, find me a wife, and I authorize you to appoint somebody else. But again, it doesn't say any of this. It's pretty shver. So right now we have three questions. Number one, Yitzchak never saw her. This is not permitted. Question number two, how could Eliezer be a shliach stam? L'charchila, you're not allowed to do that. Question number three, how is Abraham appointing Eliezer shliach to marry Yitzchak? It's not up to Abraham. Abraham's the father. The father has no authority over the kid. Question number four, and probably the most difficult question. So Rabbi Tenenbaum pointed out, well, wait a second. Eliezer's a shliach over here. Well, let's check his credentials. Last time I checked, one thing you need to be in order to be a shliach is you got to be Jewish. Now, Abraham, you can make the case, was a Yid. The Ramban says the first Yid was Abraham. Yitzchak was a Yid. But after all, remember we learned a few weeks ago when Eliezer said, maybe you want to marry off my Yitzchak to my daughter. What did Abraham say to Eliezer? Ur! You're an Ur, you're a curse, meaning you're from Canaan. You're an Eved. He's not a Yid. He's not Jewish. If he's not Jewish, he can't be a Shliach. It's halach and Shulchan Aruch. Look at number 11. Hakol kisherin l'shlichos kedushin chutz mecheresh shoita v'katan, because they're not b'nei das, and a kusi because they're not Jewish, and an eved because they're not b'tayras kedushin. You know who asked this question? None other than Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin. When the Brisker Rav would speak about the Brisker Rav, right? Man, the Grizz. When the Grizz referred to who's the Brisker Rav? The Brisker Rav is Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin. Not the Beis HaLevi. The Brisker Rav is Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin. So the Brisker Rav, the Maril Diskin, in this week's Parsha asks, we have a problem over here. The Gemara says in Gittin on Daf Chaf Gimel, Ein ha'eved nasa shliach lekabel get lefi she'enoi b'toiras Gittin v'kedushin. And for the same reason, you can't be a shliach lekadesh isha. So therefore, the kasha is Rabbi say the Avos says Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin we're makayim the Torah. to the point where Tosfos says in Ksubis that Eliezer was a shliach for Kedushin. And in Masechta Kala we learn now Birchas Erusin from Eliezer. And in fact, there's even a source that he took with him 10 gemalim. As a raya, you need 10 people for Birchas Erusin. So how in the world was Eliezer a shliach for Kedushin? Eliezer's an Eved Kanani. Says Rabbi Shmuel Leib Diskin. Come on, that's a serious question. Are you up today? Rabbi Say, everyone up? What happened? It was a regular weekend. Nothing happened last night. There's a Pasha to Teretz. There's the easiest way in the world to get around someone being an Eved Kanani. What's that? You free him. So Avraham Avinu told him, you're a free man.
So why does it say Eved?
No. When you're Meshacher and Eved, you're Toivel. Right? You Toivel, Tefillah, and Mila. But here's the problem. You're not allowed to free an Eved. Kol ha-meshacher Eved, oiver ba'aseh. You're violating mitzvahs aseh. You need to keep your Eved Kanani forever and ever. Shenemar, la'olam bohem ta'avodu. There's one exception. What's the exception? Chatzi Eved, Chatzi ben Chayrin. The Mishnah says in Gittin, we force the master to make him free. You're oiver aseh. No. The mitzvah periya v'rivya is a mitzvah rabbah. So for the sake of the Eved being able to have children, the mitzvah puravu pushes off the asay of lo'olam mehem ta'avodu. Says Rabbi Shmuel Leib Diskin, the mitzvah of Yitzchak's puravu pushed off the Yisr on Abraham of freeing the Eved. But wait a second. What? So you have to say like this, even though Tosfos says there, it has to be be'ivna, it has to be at the same time. But the mitzvah of l'olam behem ta'avodu is different. Why? Because l'olam behem ta'avodu, the Ran says is similar, I'm not sure if this is what he means, but the Ran says it's similar to loy sechanim. Don't give, it's learnt out from loy sechanim. Don't give them a freebie. Don't give them a free gift.
Nice.
Their freedom is a free gift. But if you stand to gain, then it's not a free gift. It's not for them, it's for you. Okay, I hear your point. It's not the idnei, but that's what Shmuel Leib Diskin says. One second. One second. So that's the answer. The answer is the reason why he was able to free him is for the Pruah Revu of Yitzchak. But one second. But right now, Avraham doesn't know that Eliezer is going to be successful in finding a woman for Kedushin. Maybe he won't be successful. And if he's not successful, he's freeing for nothing. So says Rabbi Shmuel Leib Diskin, you have to say he freed him al Tanai. He said, if you're successful in finding a wife for Yitzchak, you're hereby free. If you're not successful in finding a wife for Yitzchak, then you're not free and you're still an Eved.
And that would make it happen at the same time. It would take effect when you found the shidduch.
Oh, that's a good point, right? So then, at the moment that he's finding the shidduch, even though the Pruah Revu is not at the time of the Kedushin, the Pruah Revu is on the time of the Bia.
And there's no guarantee of...
So again, let's just get the cheshbon clear. The kasha is, how could Eliezer be a shliach to marry Yitzchak to Rivka, but Eliezer's a guy? The answer is Avraham freed him. Why did he free him? It's usher to free him. No, for the sake of the mitzvah of the marriage, he's allowed to free him. But the marriage, we don't know for sure. So you have to say he only freed him al Tanai, that if he finds a good wife, then he's free. So comes the Sefer Darkei Shalom and asks one simple question. The moment that Rivka said, I'm in, I think this is a good idea. So what happened at that moment? Eliezer has been proved to be free. Meaning the moment Rivka accepted the Kedushin, Eliezer is free. So why does the Torah continue to refer to Eliezer as Eved? He continues, if you take a look in Pasuk Nun Tes, Pasuk Samach Aleph, Pasuk Samach He, Pasuk Samach Vav, he's still called an Eved. Even though Rivka was already Makabel the Kedushin. So after the Kedushin, he's freed.
How could she be Makabel the Kedushin? She wasn't Bardash.
Why not? No, that's old enough.
She was 14, but
It's her father.
That's old enough. That's fine.
Your mother and brother.
So that's the kasha. The kasha is, if you're going to say that Avraham Avinu freed Eliezer al Tanai, that she accepts the Kedushin, so then he should be freed. He should no longer be an Eved.
Who's the boss?
Who's the boss? Your wife. Okay. Look at number 13. What do you? Number 13. Here's the final question. The final and the fifth question. Yitzchak brought her to the tent. Vayikaches Rivka, and he took Rivka. Now, typically, ein kicha ela kedushin. What do you mean kedushin? But Tosfos says that the kedushin already happened when Eliezer proposed to Rivka, because from there we learn out Berachas Erusin. It's mashma, the kedushin did not take place until Yitzchak took her into the tent. Why? I thought the kedushin already happened. So you'll say, it must be. We could get around all the questions. You know how we're going to answer the questions? He wasn't a real shliach. He was just finding a woman for Yitzchak, and when Yitzchak liked her, then he married her. So he saw her, and he wasn't a shliach stam, and he wasn't. It's not a problem that he's an Evet Kanani, and that's why the kedushin didn't take place until he took her. Meaning, we could answer all the questions very simply, and that is Eliezer was not a real shliach, and Yitzchak did not marry her until he saw her. Yeah, you could answer these questions if you want to argue on Tosfos. But Tosfos says that Eliezer was a shliach to marry Rivka to Yitzchak, to the point where Tosfos says that we have a raya, you make Berachas Erusin, and when the shliach does the kedushin. So if you're going to learn the sugya like Tosfos, we're up the creek without a paddle. Number one, Yitzchak didn't see her. Number two, he was a shliach l'kadesh stam. Number three, what right did Eliezer have? Yitzchak never appointed him. Number four, Eliezer was a goy, an eved. And number five, it's mashma in the pasuk, the kedushin did not take place till later. So comes the Sefer Darkei Shalom, and the Darkei Shalom says that you have to say what took place here is as follows. Let's say you're in your living room, you're in your dining room, and your kid says, I really want to get married. I really want to get married. Now, can a father stam on his own say, my kid's already 22 years old, he's already at home one day, I don't know what's going to be with him, and just on his own marry him off to another woman? Why not? There's a concept, Zachin la'adam shalai b'fanav. You're allowed to do something good for somebody else, even without their knowledge. Let's say like this. Let's say I'm walking down the street and I see $1 million ruby. If I pick it up and have you in mind, are you kaina it? Yes. But you didn't appoint me a shliach. The answer is zechia. Zechia is mitam shlichos. I could pick something up and you're kaina it, even though you didn't appoint me a shliach. It's anan sahadi that you would have appointed me a shliach. If you knew that I was passing by $1 million gem, it's anan sahadi. We're all witnesses. You would have appointed me a shliach. So why don't we say the same thing with marriage? That everybody wants to get married. Marriage is bliss. Marriage is so wonderful. So even though you didn't appoint the father to be a shliach for you, why can't the father just go and marry you off to a woman? The answer is, because everything I just said is not true. Because marriage is not a zechiyah. There are all kinds of responsibility that comes with it. Marriage is not in halacha considered a zechiyah that you could do for somebody else without their permission. If you want to be a shliach for somebody, they need to give you explicit permission. But what if you overhear them say, you know what, I really, really want to get married? Then you could go and be a shliach for them, even without their knowledge. Why? Because the only thing holding you back from being a shliach for somebody without their knowledge is you don't know that they want it. But if the person articulated, I really want to get married, then the father is authorized to go and be a shliach for somebody, for the son, without his consent. Even Isha Stam. So one second. It's very likely, even though this is a little bit of a guesstimate, that after the Akedah, when Yitzchak was 37 years old, what's the first thing you think he said after he's coming down from the Akedah? Number one, that was close. And number two is, I probably shouldn't have waited so long to get married. It would probably have been a very good idea to have been married already. Avram Avinu says, so now marriage is good for you. So now I'm entitled to go ahead and be a shliach for you to marry you off to anybody. Comes the Ktsois HaChoshen. Says this. Now take a look at number 14. This concept that if a person expresses their desire to get married, the father is allowed to marry them off to somebody, is a Gemara Kedushin Daf Mem Hamad Beis. It's called V'dilma Artsuye Artse Kame. Maybe he let it known that he wants to get married. Says Rashi, Ben Kame Aviv, the son before the father, let it known, V'gilu Leidaita, he revealed in his mind, Shehu Chafetz Ba, that he wants to get married, V'ha'av Nasa Lo Shliach Me'elav, and the father could become a shliach on his own, even without being appointed. V'zachin la'adam shaloi b'fanav. You could be mezakeh someone without their permission. Now, stam azoi, if you're walking down the street and you see someone that you know for sure your son would want to marry, could you, without their consent, marry him off to this person? No. Absolutely not. You have no idea your son wants to get married. But if he verbalizes and articulates, I want to get married. Now the case of the Gemara, it's not clear, is it only if he says I want to marry Shprinza Yenta? Or if, let's say he just says in general, I want to get married, it's not clear, then you can marry him off to Isha Stam. But we're going to take the liberty to answer these questions by extending this principle that if the son merely articulates that he wants to get married, the father could then marry him off, as the principle is Zachin la'adam shloi b'fanav. Comes the Ksois HaChoshen and says, well, once we're at it, is the father really different than anybody else? What if his best friend overhears him saying, I want to get married? Could his best friend marry him off to someone? Says the Ksois, what's an afkamina? Some comes the Ksois, U'mashma mizeh da'afilu adam acher. Anybody could do the job for him, because it's a zechiyah. He already expressed that he wants to get married. So then we could say as follows. Yitzchak is coming down from the Akedah, and he says, I really need to get married over here. It would have been great if I was married by now. Avraham hears. So Avraham says, I could be a shliach. But once word is out that Yitzchak wants to get married, it's not that Yitzchak appointed Avraham and Avraham appointed Eliezer. Eliezer appoints himself. Anybody is authorized to go ahead and act on behalf of Yitzchak and marry him to somebody.
Even an Isha.
No, because an Isha can't be a shliach. Okay, now listen carefully. But the problem is, Marav Rabbi Isai, Eliezer is not Jewish. We're going to come to that. Now, what if this shliach, so this shliach, we'll call him Eliezer, he brings home a girl and she has 2 heads or 5 noses. Can Eliezer say, yes, marriage was a zechus, but this is not what I had in mind? Could he sort of say, yes, I wanted to get married, but not this one? Or do we say, no, pal, once you express you want to get married, zachin la'adam shloi b'fanav. Says the Darkei Shalom, we could bring a raya brura that even if you express that you just want to get married, you reserve the right to reject somebody that you don't want. What's the proof? The proof is from the classic case of Shlichus in Bamatzia Daf Chaf Beis. The Gemara says, Keitzad, number 16 on the sheet, Toireim Shaloi Midas. If a shliach takes off truma from the landowner without his permission, it's a good truma. So if like this, a shliach, a random guy goes down into your field and he takes off truma shaloi bershus. If you think the one taking off truma is stealing, it's not a good truma. But if it's not stealing, it is a good truma. Says the Gemara, how do we know if the guy taking off truma is stealing or not? If the Baal Habayis comes and says, oh, you took off truma, you should have taken off even nicer ones. Klach etzel yafais. Says the Gemara, if there are better ones, then it's a good truma. Basically what he's saying is, good job, you could have even done better. But if there are no better ones, so he's being sarcastic. He's saying, why didn't you give the kitchen sink also? So the Gemara has a kash over there. The Gemara says, how in the world could you take off truma for somebody? But we know that shlichus has to be with das, and you can't appoint somebody, you can't act on somebody's behalf without their knowledge. So the Gemara says we're talking about where you appointed him a shliach. And you know what kind of shliach you appointed him? You appointed him a shliach to take off truma stam, but you didn't specify what type of truma to take off. Now, typically, what does a balabas want when he appoints someone to take off truma? To take from the beinanis. And this guy went ahead and he took from the yafais. And when the balabas comes home, he says, you took from the yafos, you should have even taken better. So if there are better, it's a good truma. And if there aren't better, it's not a good truma. Says Rav Shalom Schachter, what do we see from here? That even when you explicitly appoint someone as a shliach, if they come home and say, you know what, I don't like the job that you did, then retroactively you were not acting on their behalf. So we can make a kal v'chomer. If in the case of truma, when you verbally appointed someone, I want you to take off truma, but if they don't do it the way you want, you have the right to, you reserve the right to say, you know what, this was not what I had in mind, and the shlichus is rendered null and void l'mafreya, kal v'chomer. If all you say is, I want to get married, and the person is not acting my shliach because I appointed him, he's acting on my behalf because it's good for me, but if when he comes back with, something that I'm not interested in, I reserve the right to say thanks but no thanks. My Rabbi side, this answers all the questions. How's that? Yitzchak merely said, I want to get married. And Avram has the right to go and find a wife for him. And Eliezer has the right to go marry him off. What do you mean? He never appointed them. This is called what? Zechia mitam shlichos. Who appointed them? Yitzchak did. How did Yitzchak appoint? By verbalizing his desire to get married. This becomes a zechus. Zachin la'adam shaloi b'fanav. This answers question number 3. In other words, question number 3 was, who appointed Eliezer? The answer is Yitzchak did, by articulating the fact that he wants to get married. Question number 1. How is Yitzchak allowed to marry her without seeing her? The answer is very pashut. I have a question. You're not allowed to marry somebody without seeing them. What if you see them, and their nose is so long you don't like them? So, maya hanile. So now you can go around your whole life hating this yidina because she has an ugly nose. So what's the answer? The answer is people don't hate people just because they don't like the way they look. Unless you're married to them. Right? People are not so prejudiced that... So, the shot is like this. You're not allowed to marry someone unless you see them. If you see them, you don't like the way you look, you're not going to marry them. So the same thing over here. Yitzchak said, I want to get married. And Eliezer is performing the Kedushin. Rabbi say, where is the Kedushin Chal? In Padan Aram. It's Chal. However, if he brings her home, and Yitzchak says, no. What else is on the menu? If Yitzchak says, what other options are there? I don't like the way she looks. He reserves the right to say, this is not what I had in mind. The shlichus was rendered null and void l'mafreya, and he's not acting on... In other words, he's never marrying a woman that he doesn't like the way she looks, because ultimately he reserves the right to say, no thank you. No get is needed. In other words, retroactively, the shlichus was not good. Okay, next question. Next question. L'chadchila, you're not allowed to be a shliach to marry a woman stam. Why? Because maybe the shliach will die, and you're not going to know who you're married to, and you're going to be usher to marry everyone in the world. So hagaba atzmacha. What would happen if Eliezer never showed up? If Eliezer never showed up, so Yitzchak says, granted, I wanted to get married, and he was allowed to act on my behalf, but his shlichus was not good for me. If his shlichus was not good for me, he was not acting on my behalf. He's not acting on my behalf, the shlichus is rendered null and void. Meaning until you come back with a woman that I could marry, you're not a shliach. Your shlichus has not been proven. So therefore, yes, typically you can't be a shliach l'kadesh stam because of the kilkel that could happen. But in this case, there's no problem with the kilkel, because until he approves of the selection, it's not a good shlichus and nothing bad could happen. Question number 4. But Eliezer is a guy. So the answer is very pashut. Abraham freed him. But maybe he's not gonna... Rabbi Shiur Leib Diskin says, but what do you mean? But he's not, maybe he won't do the job. So we'll say he freed Eliezer al Tanai, that if he does the good job, then he's free. So we asked, but that means as soon as Rivka accepted the Kedushin, so Eliezer is free, why do we still call him an Eved? The answer is very pashut. Because ultimately, if he brings her back, and Yitzchak says no, then the shlichus is rendered null and void, and the freedom is considered null and void. So he's not out of the category of Eved Avraham until Yitzchak says,
Okay.
good gesagt, until Yitzchak says, good job. In other words, until Vayiviyah Hoyel al Sarah.
So if he's not, so how could he make the kedushin then? If he's still an Eved, if he's not.
No, Lemafreya, he's freed. But he's only freed al Tanai that it's a good kedushin and that Yitzchak will approve of it in the end. Last question.
Do we find that this is somewhere after Yitzchak was married?
Called Eved? No. In fact, we do find a medrash that he was able to get out of being an Eved. That ultimately, by Baruch Hashem, that ultimately he was extricated from that category. So, no, after the story, he's not called Eved. I hope not. I don't think so.
He liked Rivka, so you're right.
Finally, let's look back at number 13. Vayiviyeha Yitzchak. Yitzchak brings her to the tent. Vayikach es Rivka. And now he does the kedushin. So this, we asked the kedushin already took place. The Maisa kedushin took place. However, the kedushin is not chal until Yitzchak gives the final approval, and at that point in time, Yitzchak approves of the girl, and now the kedushin is chal lemafreya. But we could say vayikach because this is really what approves and stamps the kedushin as chal. So, Rabbi say this whole mahalach is keeping with the explanation of Tosfos that Eliezer, in fact, was a full-fledged shliach lekedushin, and the kedushin took place in Padan Aram, and there was birchas erusin. He's a guy, he was freed, almanas, that Yitzchak would approve, and it's not a problem he didn't see her, it's not a problem that as a shliach stam, because Yitzchak maintained the right for the final approval. Let's add something, and that is, how was Eliezer allowed to make birchas erusin? L'chayra, he didn't know for sure that Yitzchak would approve. If Yitzchak doesn't approve, then it's going to be a bracha levatala. There's going to be a bracha levatala. So that's...
The guy.
No, he was freed. Otherwise it wouldn't be a kedushin. No, he was freed before, and it will only remain that way if Yitzchak approves. But at that moment, he's a yid. So you have to say, like Rashi says, that I have a question. Eliezer put the ring on Rivka right away. Well, why is he giving away millions of dollars? Maybe the kedushin's not going to go through. So you have to say that he had such bitachon in Hashem that here he davened and he could barely get the words out of his mouth, and v'hinei Rivka yotzes. So the fact that he saw that this was divinely orchestrated, and he had enough. In other words, you'll say, come on, it's a suffix, how can you make a bracha? Would you give up money on me suffix? So Eliezer says, I put my money where my mouth is. Look how much bitachon I have. I even give the money to her because I'm confident it's going to go through. That amount of birur, he was allowed to rely on even to make the bracha of birchas erusin. Rabbi say, I gave you what to think about. Have a great day. Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.